It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Now, over the last couple of weeks, I talked about some smaller films from directors who work more on the lower end of budgets. But for this week, let's talk about a big-time director following up on a massive hit of his with a pretty large budget for horror at the time and working with some pretty damn big names. This week, I'm discussing 1978's The Fury from director Brian De Palma. By 1978, De Palma had been in the business for a decade. For the most part, the earliest part of his career, from 1968 until about 1972, found him working mostly on farces, black comedies, and experimental types of movies. Then in 1972, he released Sisters, which was a psychological horror film about separated conjoined twins, one of which was a suspected murderer. This led to 1974's Phantom of the Paradise, a retelling and reimagining of Phantom of the Opera with more a 70s style of music and sensibilities around fame, fortune, and so forth in the music biz. 2 years later, De Palma struck absolute gold with his adaptation of Stephen King's Carrie. Not only did that serve as the first adaptation of a King novel that was so popular and successful that it launched its own subgenre of films from King's works, not only did it make Sissy Spacek a legitimate star, earning both her and Piper Laurie Oscar nominations for their performances in it, not only did it garner widespread critical acclaim, but it also made Brian De Palma a serious star in the director's chair. Launching off of Carrie, he returned to the telekinetic horror side of things with this film that we will be discussing in greater detail. But you also have Dressed to Kill with Michael Caine, the phenomenal Blowout starring John Travolta, Scarface starring Al Pacino, The Untouchables, Casualties of Wars, and on and on. Now, not all of De Palma's movies were all that well liked all the time. Famously, Scarface was not well received really at all upon its release. It wasn't until the late 80s, early 90s when younger film fans kind of started to build a kind of cult classic following around that. A little bit later on his timeline, The Bonfire of the Vanities is considered one of the biggest missteps in film history, at least at the time. Now, despite me liking it, 1992's Raising Cain was generally disliked by audiences and critics, even to this day. The Black Dahlia in the 2000s was mostly considered a miss, but still, there was a period of time in which Brian De Palma was considered a true giant in the world of directors. Now, coming off that success of Carrie, which was made for less than $2 million and grossed over $30 million, The Fury would get a $7.5 million budget. That allowed for him to lure names like Kirk Douglas in the lead, John Cassavetes, former Oscar nominee Carrie Snodgrass, Charles Durning, and Amy Irving, who was not only in Carrie previously, but to whom De Palma was romantically involved with at the time. Douglas and Cassavetes were major names. Douglas had built an entire career around his machismo in movies like Spartacus. I could spend an hour on Douglas alone. But despite already kind of getting up there in age, he was still a star in 1978. Cassavetes was a little bit more of the modern day kind of cool. He made films with his wife, Gena Rowlands, that were quite popular. In fact, a few years before this movie, he made A Woman Under the Influence, which he was nominated for Best Director for, and I believe Rowlands was nominated for Best Actress. He co-starred previously, and we talked about this movie, as Mia Farrow's husband in the smash hit Rosemary's Baby 10 years before The Fury. Now, another big name working on this movie is makeup artist Rick Baker. Now, Baker had previously worked on movies like The Exorcist and King Kong. He was among the very best in the entire business of makeup effects. So much so, he would win the very first Oscar for the category of Best Makeup and then get nominated 10 more times in the category while also winning 6 more awards. That's a That's 7 wins across 11 nominations. And what's really kind of cool about Baker is that he's not exactly the Tom Savini style of makeup effects artist. He's not always the gross out kind of guy. The work he was often cited for at the Oscars ranged from his first and last Oscars for terrifying werewolf designs in American Werewolf in London and the Wolfman remake, to the kind face of Bigfoot in Harry and the Hendersons, or the comedic prosthetics for Eddie Murphy in multiple roles in The Nutty Professor. Sometimes he just made people look like they were supposed to in this sort of parody of a biopic, Ed Wood. Sure, there are names like Stan Winston, Dick Smith, Rob Bottin, Tom Savini, and his protege, Greg Nicotero. But Rick Baker is generally and genuinely considered the top of the tops of makeup effects guys. So the Fury opens in the Middle East in 1977. More accurately, it begins in Israel. American Peter Sansa, played by Douglas, and his son Robin are preparing to move back to the United States after years of living abroad. Peter has arranged for Robin to go to a special school, despite his former government agency co-worker and friend Ben Childress, played by Cassavetes, trying to basically talk him out of the idea. Ben and Peter are fully aware of Robin's particular special talents. You see, Robin is a psychic, but a terrorist attack occurs and Peter narrowly escapes with his life, but appears to have died in the attack. Now, here's the real rub. Ben staged the whole thing in order to make off with Robin under the guise of keeping him safe. Peter swims back ashore and witnesses Ben talking to one of his fake terrorist goons and ends up shooting him with a machine gun in his arm, basically making his arm useless to him. For the rest of the movie, he's wearing a glove over that left hand and that left arm is in a sling. We pick back up in 1978 in Chicago, where we meet high school student Gillian, played by Amy Irving. She starts hearing the thoughts of someone while talking to a friend and prepping for a test at their school. This stranger, Raymond Dunwoody, is working with Peter to find someone who has the psychic ability that will help him locate Robin. Now, meanwhile, an angry Ben is chasing after Peter as well. While Dunwoody speaks to Peter on the phone, the agency has tracked Peter to his hotel room, but Peter narrowly escapes. Now, later, Gillian has basically watched this presentation put on by an organization called Paragon, who studies psychic and telekinetic powers. And she ultimately agrees to attend this boarding school run by Paragon after a couple of incidents at her original school. At that demonstration put on by Paragon, she shows a great deal of ability with telekinesis and second sight. The sight of a dead person startles her and causes her to run electric trains that she's controlling with her powers off the track. Then later, a bully at school confronts her and she worries that she might have hurt this girl with her powers when she made her angry. The decision to go to Paragon is based on that fear that she will continue to hurt people if she can't figure out a way to either control or get rid of her powers. Now, during another daring escape, Peter explains to a parapoliceman that he worked for a clandestine government organization called PSI that is pretty well known for disappearing people in order to get what they want from certain subjects. They have taken kids like Robin in order to use them for various covert missions. And they basically take the kids, brainwash them, get rid of their families, and then use them for their powers. Peter has an insider at Paragon. His girlfriend is a nurse at Paragon named Hester. He meets up with her and asks her to help him. She says that Paragon's records say that Robin is dead, but Peter knows that that's a fake report because Ben Childress kind of controls those reports and has basically stuck his fingers in the operations at Paragon. As Gillian moves to the Paragon Institute, she meets Hester, who she gets close with, and the headmaster of the school, Dr. McKeever, played by Charles Durning. Gillian excels at Paragon and begins to feel much more comfortable with her abilities. When she accidentally touches the hand of McKeever one day when she nearly trips up the stairs, she sees Robin basically being chased through the Institute and also sees Robin basically fall out of a window. Now, McKeever decides to crank up his testing of Gillian, and he orders her to be dosed with a truth serum and so that they can learn what she saw in that vision. And he wants to send Gillian home, realizing how powerful she is. He really kind of has an all of a sudden kind of turn in his opinion of how they should treat Gillian. He worries that she's too powerful, like Robin. And if all things were equal, he thinks that the future of these gifted people would be considered saviors or healers or just simply magicians, but people of great importance. However, the current culture will not allow people like Robin and Gillian to assimilate, and they'll be basically hunted down or manipulated and used. As we find out that that's the plan that Ben Childress had all along. But the next morning, McKeever is visited by Childress, and he wants to know specifically about Gillian. And McKeever keeps tabs on, Childress keeps tabs on Paragon and basically wants to poach their top students to be used for his organization, PSI's needs. Now, Hester overhears that Robin is indeed still alive and being kept by the secret organization by Childress. And apparently Robin's abilities are well honed thanks to what goes on at Childress's organization. And he thinks that Gillian can be just as useful to him and as powerful as Robin. Childress has now increased security at Paragon by adding cameras, microphones, and has posted agents outside. Dr. Lindstrom, McKeever's partner at Paragon, shows Gillian a picture of Robin, and she reveals that he's apparently strapped into a chair and being looked over by the scientist, one doctor in particular, Dr. Susan Charles, who really has manipulated Robin, or at least to the point that they seemingly are maybe in a romantic relationship even. But these people keep showing Robin the film that was taken of the attack in Israel when he believed his father was killed. And it's essentially psychological torture and driving him insane. Out of fear, Gillian grabs Lindstrom's hands, and Lindstrom begins bleeding heavily from her hand, her eyes, her nose, and mouth until she collapses into a coma. Childress has seen enough from Gillian to know that he wants her transferred to his PSI agency immediately. Gillian can now basically see things about Robin by simply being in the Paragon building. She starts piecing together the mystery of what happened to Robin. He sees that Susan Charles had gained Robin's trust, and she convinced him to leave Paragon with her. But of course, that was only to basically transfer him to PSI. Gillian can see that Robin is in quite a bit of trouble. Hester tells Gillian that she can help her get to Robin, but she needs to trust her, because if they can't get her away from Paragon, basically the following morning, she's going to be in terrible trouble. Meanwhile, Robin's powers are flying off the charts. Dr. Charles says that he can control machines. Seeing the film of his father's death creates a huge output of energy, psychic energy, drugs that are typically used to calm him down when he has those expulsions of that telekinetic power aren't really working on him anymore. He is more or less turning into an atomic bomb that could go off at any time. He cannot handle any disappointment in his life. When he fails at something physical, she says he's unbearable. When he experiences jealousy, when he sees Susan talking to colleagues and friends from PSI, he's nearly violent with her. At a really cool indoor carnival, he sees a large group of Middle Eastern businessmen. This triggers his powers as he remembers the attack that supposedly killed his father. As he walks by attractions, his power causes light bulbs to explode. He also focuses on the ride that the Middle Eastern men are on and causes it to speed up and fling the cars the men were on into another attraction where more of the Middle Easterners were sitting down and eating lunch. So Hester's plan to get Gillian out of Paragon works almost perfectly. She fakes, having Gillian take her downers, and Gillian is able to slip out of an unlocked door that Hester has left open. Hester is able to get some people knocked down and out of the way to help Gillian get even further. But when Peter, waiting for the pair, kills a PSI agent chasing after Gillian in a car, the dead man turns the wheel as he slumps over right into Hester and kills her. Peter is pretty upset about this. He's actually really distraught over losing Hester, but he is able to get Gillian away and on a bus out of town. Once they get near the PSI campus, Robin is being held. Peter and Gillian plan to break in to save him. However, Robin seems highly agitated. He's cruel to Dr. Charles for having drinks and smelling of alcohol. He also senses Gillian's presence, and this makes him paranoid that PSI is planning to kill him and replace him with Gillian. He lashes out at Dr. Charles by basically torturing her and then killing her. Peter and Gillian are captured when her visions of what Robin is doing to Susan Charles causes her to scream and basically run out into the open. Childress then comes to see Peter and tells him, hey, you can go see your son. Sure, go check out what Robin is up to. However, Robin is crazed by all of the stuff the PSI has done to him, and he attacks his own father to try to kill him. Peter and Robin fly out of a window, and Peter tries holding on to his son, who is falling off of the roof. But Robin scratches Peter's face, which causes Peter to let his hold on Robin loosen, and Robin falls to the ground. And before he dies, Robin seemingly transfers his own powers to Gillian. Distraught over losing his wife when Robin was born, losing Robin twice now, and losing Hester, he decides to throw himself from the roof to his own death. The next morning, Gillian wakes up in a bed in the PSI compound to find Childress in the room with her. It's obvious he plans to turn Gillian into the same thing as Robin, and he tries to tell her that, Peter deliberately tried to kill his own son, and she begins to try to manipulate her into trusting him. Knowing everything Robin knew, Gillian exacts revenge for both of them by directing her brand new, completely refined powers at Childress, and she causes him to first go blind by bleeding from his eyes, and then he begins to convulse, and then he finally freaking explodes. And that's the end of the movie. He friggin' explodes. But let's talk about the three things I liked about The Fury. Now, first, the movie is an interesting blend of supernatural thriller, political intrigue, and the older style of adapting these types of horror novels that get deep into the whys and hows of the characters' various afflictions or what have you. So let's start with that third thing. This is a movie that takes its subject matter extremely seriously. This is a relatively detailed movie. Gillian's powers manifest in a way that it sends out this field that makes people bleed. Had a surgery over the past few months, it will basically reopen the wounds. Nearing your period, you're going to bleed. Have ulcers, you're going to be in big trouble. It's a very specific detail and an interesting piece of what these powers of the mind are like and how it affects others around people as they kind of let loose this energy from them. and it kind of emanates from them. In a lesser adaptation, this would have been something that would have either been completely cut out or brushed over to the point that it probably should have just been completely dropped from the story. It could have also been used in ways that would have been upping the gore element of it, instead of it really kind of being an indication that powers are being used. But it reads like you're sitting down and reading the book that this is based on. It's kind of one of those things that these types of books, whether it was something like Carrie or maybe like one of the Robin Cook adaptations or something like this, where it really does feel like you are being told something that very obviously began with a novel because of how detailed and well thought out these kind of ideas are in the movie. Now, if we were to talk about the more political intrigue around this story, the action element to this movie with the Peter and Ben characters feels like it might make this movie overstuffed. But honestly, it really helps build the real tension of this movie, at least until the final 20 minutes or so. The movie could have just been these scary characters with scary powers that they use for revenge, or like Carrie, again, they can't control it because of maladjusted upbringing or something. However, there's a kind of scarier threat in the grand scheme of things. This is a big, powerful secret government organization that is clearly trying to find kids who can be manipulated into becoming killers. We are following two characters who have very special connections to one particular kid, Robin. Of course, we have his father, who his own friend tried to kill to kidnap the kid. Gillian is the other girl, and we'll talk more about her in just a moment, but Peter is run through the ringer in this, and he's up against a pretty large and powerful group, or more accurately, a person. It kind of builds this Men in Black sort of boogeyman that I not only found that I was really engaged with, but it really gives this movie some actual pep. This is a 2-hour movie, and it does not skimp on details or blow through any scenes, yet it still feels pretty fast paced. I really like how this doesn't feel like a long movie. It cooks along at a pretty good clip, and it's a lot to do with that intrigue, that political intrigue part of this story, because there are actually some action set pieces in the movie that really work quite well and really builds a lot of that tension for us. Now let's talk about the actual horror portion of this 3-part story. The final portion of this movie is when we catch back up with Robin. And when we last saw him in the movie, he was this loving son, excited to return to the United States with his father, but he's been turned into an absolute monster. He murders those Middle Eastern businessmen at that carnival. He quickly loses his temper with Dr. Charles when she's talking to other men. Then, in that final scene that he's in, he's extremely cruel and an absolute maniac. So the powers that he and Gillian share have terrifying consequences. McKeever was right in the regard that they could do wonderful things, but they also make people bleed. If they aren't that good at people, they can do awful, terrible things that basically is tantamount to torture. So they can be manipulated to do these terrible things on purpose, or they can be untrained and do them accidentally. McKeever was also right that it's going to be incredibly difficult for these people to, assimilate into society while they have these powers. So by basically having Robin turn out to be turned totally evil and insane by what PSI has put them through is a surprising twist too, and really kind of a sad one. We hope that Gillian is going to be fine because of what Robin gave to her is mixed in with who she already is. But will she be okay? We saw a change in her too. She is this kind of happy-go-lucky 17-year-old kid when we first see her. And then we see what happens when she gets pushed a little bit too far. Her bully potentially gets very, very badly harmed by her if Robin or if Gillian didn't run away from that. We don't know what she's going to be like now, because she is positively the most powerful person on the planet, and she has a lot of unresolved issues to deal with. Yeah, maybe she has these refined powers from Robin, but is she able to really handle the weight of her powers and of her status as being this incredibly powerful person? If, being 17 or 18 years old, she's going to get mad again, and is she going to kill somebody with those powers? Even if she doesn't really mean to, could it happen? It's hard to say where she's going to be at this. And all of that is the horror of this movie, and very well handled too. And you mix that in with what Robin became and how this guy had spent the last year of his life trying to find his son and retrieve him, only to find out that his son technically did die when it appeared that he died. That's sad and scary. And all of the stuff that these two characters with these powers have, really kind of builds that horror element, in a much different way than just the flat out attacking people, having gory, killing scenes and whatever. But yes, honestly, if I really wanted to, I could have given one whole like to that final scene, with John Cassavetes and Amy Irving in that bedroom when he explodes, because that's a hell of a way for a movie to end. Every movie should end with someone exploding. The Fury and Blood Debts, two movies who know how to do movies. That wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Wednesday morning Film Seizure podcast and the Monday afternoon Monster Mondays podcast at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new review articles every Friday morning. Next time, we revisit an old friend in the form of Doctor Who, as Tom Baker's fourth Doctor finds himself in a Frankenstein-esque scenario that involves others of his own kind in the classic serial, The Brain of Morbius. Until next week, stay spooky.